Comment on the video, where are people watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. In the opening moments of the narrative, we are introduced to an incident that immediately disrupts the ordinary with a sudden burst of danger and intrigue. The scene unfolds as a man points a gun at the wife of the narrator while she jogs past the HOA clubhouse. The vivid description of this incident sets the stage for an unexpected collision between everyday suburban life and extraordinary hidden depths. Notably, the wife remains entirely unaware that she is, in fact, an active Delta Force operative just back from a mission, an ironic twist that underlines the theme of duality in identity. The initial seconds, from midnight to 0:34, serve as a catalyst for the entire narrative. The juxtaposition of a seemingly ordinary setting, a peaceful suburban environment governed by the HOA, with an element of high-octane military prowess creates an immediate tension in the narrative. The fact that a man can casually pull a gun on someone in such a commonplace environment not only shocks the narrator but also the reader, prompting an immediate curiosity about the motivations behind this violent act. The narrative deliberately leaves gaps in the explanation of the assailant's intentions, encouraging the reader to question the nature of the threat. Is the armed man a hired thug, a misguided neighbor, or someone with a hidden vendetta against the Delta Force operative? This ambiguity amplifies the tension and sets up a mystery that drives the story forward. Simultaneously, the scene hints at the underlying conflicts that simmer beneath the surface of the neighborhood, possibly involving power struggles, hidden grudges, or deeply rooted personal agendas. An intriguing aspect of this opening is the deliberate contrast between the public facade and the secret life of the wife. As she jogs past the HOA clubhouse, she appears to be just another resident partaking in her morning routine. However, the revelation that she is an elite operative adds layers of complexity to her character. Her military background, hinted at only briefly, implies that she possesses skills and resilience far beyond those of an ordinary homeowner. This stark contrast forces the reader to question how she ended up in such a mundane environment and what kind of challenges she might face balancing her dual identities. Moreover, the incident takes place near the HOA clubhouse, a symbol of suburban order and regulation, which is sharply contrasted by the unpredictability of the armed confrontation. The presence of the HOA in this context serves as a reminder of the rigid, sometimes absurd control that governs the community, hinting that beneath the surface of strict rules lies a turbulent undercurrent of personal drama and conflict. Overall, the opening segment is crafted to immediately grab attention through its mix of mundane and extraordinary elements. The calm of suburban life is violently interrupted by an act of aggression, and the unexpected revelation of the wife's true identity adds an ironic twist that challenges our assumptions about heroism and normalcy. The reader is left with questions that build anticipation. What is the motive behind the attack? How does the presence of a Delta Force operative alter the perceived dynamics of the neighborhood? And most importantly, how will this incident ripple through the fabric of everyday life controlled by the omnipresent, yet paradoxically impotent, authority of the HOA? This multifaceted introduction thus lays a strong foundation for a narrative that promises to explore themes of identity, authority, and the collision of vastly different worlds, all set against the backdrop of an ostensibly ordinary suburban community. After settling into the serene confines of Sunnyside Acres, Murray Muhammad and his wife, Layla, soon discovered that their dream of suburban peace came with unexpected challenges. They had chosen the neighborhood for its promise of quiet streets and neighborly charm, only to learn that the community was governed by an overbearing system. Despite the facade of calm, everyday life in Sunnyside Acres was under constant surveillance by the HOA's own peculiar form of enforcement, the so-called HOA police, who patrolled the area in golf carts. Every day seemed to bring with it reminders of the strict order imposed by the HOA. Murray noticed that, in contrast to the soft, natural rhythms of the neighborhood, these officers conducted their patrols with a seriousness that bordered on absurdity. Dressed in crisply ironed uniforms and riding in their low-slung golf carts, they zipped around the cul-de-sac issuing citations and measuring every inch of lawn, as though the residents' private spaces were subject to rigorous military inspection. For Murray, this reality was a far cry from the laid-back life he had envisioned. What initially appeared to be an ideal suburban retreat soon revealed itself to be a tightrope walk between personal liberty and the HOA's uncompromising regulations. Layla, equally unprepared for such strict oversight, would often share a disbelieving laugh over a morning cup of coffee as they recounted tales of minor infractions, complaints about the height of a hedge, the angle of a mailbox, or even the color of a garden ornament. The couple quickly learned that their every move was being monitored. Neighbors whispered about the relentless patrols, and even the sound of the golf carts became a constant background hum in their once peaceful neighborhood. As the days passed, Murray and Layla began to notice that this form of policing went beyond merely enforcing community standards. It was a display of authority that left little room for flexibility or genuine neighborly understanding, creating an atmosphere of tension and, at times, resentment. Despite the many inconveniences, Murray tried to adjust to these realities, reminding himself that rules were in place for everyone's benefit, or so he was told. Yet, a nagging sense of unease began to grow inside him. The strict patrols and the heavy-handed approach of the HOA's enforcers seemed to contradict the natural, welcoming spirit of Sunnyside Acres. For a couple whose dream had been to find a peaceful haven, the situation was increasingly disconcerting. As Murray and Layla navigated the early days in their new home, they found themselves questioning the true cost of suburban order. The idyllic setting was tarnished by what felt like an intrusion of authority into every aspect of their daily lives. This uneasy beginning laid the foundation for the unfolding events, a battle not just for personal freedom, but for the right to enjoy the simple, unmonitored pleasures of home life without being constantly scrutinized by an overzealous HOA. A week into their new life at Sunnyside Acres, Murray Muhammad's wife, Layla, set out on her regular morning jog. Dressed casually and in her running gear, she was determined to embrace the neighborhood's natural beauty despite the underlying tensions. As she passed by the imposing HOA clubhouse, a stark symbol of the neighborhood's rigid order, an unexpected commotion abruptly shattered the calm. Out of nowhere, a small squad of HOA officers, riding their golf carts as if on a mission, converged along the jogging path. They had been dispatched to perform an impromptu inspection, and before long, they were demanding that Layla produce her identification. Their voices were firm and tinged with authority, echoing off the neatly trimmed hedges and manicured lawns. Layla, however, was not an ordinary resident. Unbeknownst to these overzealous officers, she was an active Delta Force operative, recently returned from a mission. While the officers believed they were dealing with a simple violation of community protocol, Layla's calm confidence under pressure hinted at a very different reality. With a steady gaze and measured tone, she complied with their requests, only to swiftly disarm one of the approaching officers who attempted an aggressive advance. Her precise, almost choreographed movements left the officers momentarily stunned. Murray, observing from a safe distance, felt a rush of pride mixed with concern. He had known that Layla possessed exceptional skills, but witnessing her take control of a volatile situation with such composed authority was both awe-inspiring and alarming. The encounter, though brief, exposed the absurdity of the HOA's enforcement methods. It was clear that these officers, in their zeal to uphold trivial community standards, were completely unprepared for the reality of dealing with someone of Layla's caliber. In the midst of the confrontation, a moment of silence fell over the scene. The officers, now uncertain of how to proceed, exchanged glances, their rigid composure beginning to crumble under the weight of Layla's presence. Instead of further escalating the situation, she calmly reiterated her right to be in the neighborhood. Her poise and undeniable skills sent an unmistakable message that the usual rules might not apply when faced with unexpected competency. When the officers finally dispersed, their authoritative show reduced to an embarrassed retreat, Layla resumed her jog as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Yet for Murray, and undoubtedly for the HOA leaders, the incident had planted a seed of concern. The altercation had revealed not only the shortcomings of the HOA's policy enforcement but also the reality that beneath the surface of the seemingly quiet neighborhood lay individuals with extraordinary abilities. This first encounter thus set the tone for the escalating series of events that would follow. It underscored the tension between an overbearing, bureaucratic system and the unexpected strength of a resident who defied ordinary expectations, hinting at the dramatic conflicts yet to come. In the immediate aftermath of the dramatic encounter, the neighborhood of Sunnyside Acres was thrown into tumult. Following Layla's calm yet astonishing disarmament of the overzealous HOA officer, the incident rapidly escalated beyond the initial confrontation. Within minutes, the sound of distant sirens heralded the arrival of real police, summoned to restore order after the confusion at the HOA clubhouse. The sudden intervention by the authorities, however, did little to diffuse the palpable tension that now permeated the community. As the real police officers stepped onto the scene, the overbearing members of the HOA scrambled to spin the unfolding events. In a flurry of frantic phone calls and hurried meetings, the HOA leadership, already notorious for their draconian enforcement practices, attempted to craft a narrative that would deflect blame away from themselves. They issued statements insisting that the incident was simply a minor breach of community protocol that had been swiftly handled. Yet, the gravity of what had transpired could not be so easily dismissed. At an emergency HOA meeting later that day, the community center brimmed with residents anxious to learn the truth. Tension soared as a large crowd gathered, each person eager to understand how the evening's events would reshape their neighborhood's dynamics. The atmosphere in the meeting room was charged with a mix of indignation and anticipation. Many residents recounted the moments they witnessed, their voices trembling with a blend of fear and admiration for the unexpected heroism displayed by Layla. The meeting quickly degenerated into a battleground of opinions. One faction, composed of longtime supporters of the HOA's strict policies, argued that order must be maintained at all costs and that the incident was an unfortunate but isolated occurrence. In contrast, a growing number of residents, emboldened by what they saw as a clear overreach by the HOA, demanded accountability. They questioned the necessity of such invasive practices and the competence of a system that could be upended by someone who should have been just another resident. Murray, whose concern for his wife's well-being had been a silent undercurrent since the confrontation, found himself at the center of this public debate. He stood in the back of the room, listening as community members spoke passionately about the right to privacy and the need for a more balanced approach to neighborhood governance. His heart pounded with a mixture of relief and anxiety, relief that Layla had handled herself so admirably, and anxiety over what the repercussions of this incident might be for the entire community. Meanwhile, the police, whose arrival had been meant to restore calm, maintained a cautious distance. Their investigation was swift. Officers interviewed those present and quickly documented the unusual series of events. Their report, however, was later met with skepticism by several residents who believed that the true nature of the incident had been obfuscated by the HOA's initial attempts to downplay what had occurred. As the emergency meeting wore on, it became clear that the incident had opened a Pandora's box of long-standing grievances. Many residents began to see the encounter not as an isolated incident, but as symptomatic of a much larger problem, a culture of overreach and authoritarian control entrenched within the HOA. Heated debates over community standards, individual rights, and accountability filled the room. The once moderate discourse gave way to impassioned calls for reform, and the mood shifted from one of tentative acceptance of strict rules to outright defiance. Amid the rising chorus of dissent, several voices called for the immediate replacement of the current HOA leadership. They argued that the incident had exposed deep flaws in the system. Flaws that threatened not only property rights but also the very fabric of community trust. With every testimonial and every piece of evidence presented, the case for fundamental change grew stronger. The meeting ended on a note of cautious optimism, as residents began to rally around the idea of a more inclusive, transparent, and fair system of governance. For Murray and Layla, the night's tumult was both a personal victory and a catalyst for broader change. Though shaken by the violence of the encounter and the chaotic response that followed, they emerged with a renewed sense of purpose. The events of that evening would not be forgotten. They would become the spark that ignited a movement toward reclaiming autonomy and respect within Sunnyside Acres. In the wake of the chaotic aftermath that followed the confrontation, the incident quickly exploded into a public spectacle that captured the attention of everyone in Sunnyside Acres. Video footage from the scene. Shot by onlookers using smartphones, began circulating online, and the raw energy of the event struck a chord with many. The extraordinary actions of Layla Muhammad, the wife who had calmly disarmed the aggressive HOA officer, became the talk of the town. This spectacle laid bare not only the overreach of the local HOA but also underscored the acute imbalance in power that had long gone unchecked. Residents who had previously suffered quietly under the strict regime of the HOA suddenly found the courage to speak up. Social media platforms, local forums, and even neighborhood gossip columns started sharing the story, analyzing every detail of Layla's fearless response. The viral nature of the footage exposed the HOA's oppressive practices to a wider audience, sparking public outrage and a re-examination of the authorities' role in the community. Many questioned why such an absurd level of scrutiny was imposed on a resident simply going for a jog, and debates quickly ignited over the proper limits of HOA power. At community meetings held in the days that followed, a palpable sense of unity began to emerge from the shared indignation. Neighbors who had long endured the same intrusive inspections and baseless fines voiced their frustrations. They recounted numerous instances where they had felt bullied by the same officers who now appeared in the viral videos. In these gatherings, long-standing grievances were aired, and the public began to demand accountability from the HOA and a thorough reappraisal of its enforcement policies. Murray Muhammad, having watched the incident unfold with a blend of pride and concern for his wife, became a reluctant spokesperson for the enraged community. Despite his reserved nature, he found himself increasingly drawn into the public debate. Murray's own testimony, complemented by the indisputable evidence circulating online, painted a stark picture of a community held hostage by arbitrary rules. With every retelling of the events, residents' passion grew stronger. They rallied behind the idea that their neighborhood deserved leadership that respected personal freedom and prioritized genuine community welfare over petty regulation. As the online and offline discussions continued, the narrative quickly spread beyond Sunnyside Acres. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon the incident was featured in regional broadcasts. Reports portrayed the encounter as emblematic of a broader struggle, a David versus Goliath battle between everyday citizens and an unyielding bureaucratic institution. Public sentiment overwhelmingly sided with the residents, and the incident ignited calls for significant reform. Amid this surge of community response, many residents organized protests and town hall meetings demanding a re-evaluation of the HOA's practices. Petitions circulated, calling for stricter oversight of the HOA and even for the removal of those in leadership positions who had allowed such egregious abuses of power to occur. In this environment of public scrutiny and reform-minded activism, the inflexible rules enforced by the HOA were increasingly seen as relics of an outdated system that no longer served the best interests of the community. The impact of the incident reverberated through Sunnyside Acres, uniting residents in ways that had long been unthinkable. What began as a single, isolated episode was now a rallying cry for justice and accountability, a reminder that when the community stands together, even the most entrenched institutions can be challenged. For Murray and Layla, and for every resident who had felt the sting of arbitrary authority, the viral footage became more than just a moment captured on camera. It was a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope that signaled the beginning of a new chapter for the neighborhood. In the wake of the mounting public outcry, the HOA's response escalated dramatically. The board, desperate to regain control and salvage their image, began sending official notices to Murray and Layla Muhammad. These documents, filled with technical jargon and seemingly impartial language, accused Layla of violating community standards, a claim that was as baseless as it was infuriating. According to the HOA's own rules, her actions on that fateful morning should have been routine, yet the board sought to frame the incident as a serious breach of order. Karen, the long-standing head of the HOA, was at the forefront of these retaliatory measures. She insisted that the confrontation with the HOA officers, however unexpected, constituted a violation of community decorum. Official notices were circulated, threatening fines and potential legal action if the Muhammad family did not comply with a strict interpretation of the rules. The very instruments meant to enforce order now smacked of vindictiveness. Murray, deeply troubled by these developments and the clear intention to suppress dissent, decided that a legal response was unavoidable. Together with Layla, he consulted a trusted attorney renowned for challenging bureaucratic overreach. After hours of review, it became evident that the HOA's claims were not only unsupported by the established community guidelines but were in direct conflict with the events as documented and witnessed by numerous residents. Armed with his comprehensive dossier, comprising photos, video evidence from the viral incident, and detailed logs of the HOA's subsequent notices, Murray prepared to fight back. In a series of tense legal meetings, his attorney outlined a strategy, challenged the validity of the notices by demonstrating that the incident was not only justified but that the HOA's actions were a deliberate overreach designed to intimidate and silence the community. The legal battle was framed as a struggle for basic rights. A fight against arbitrary power and an assertion of the residents' right to live free from undue harassment. The case swiftly moved to the municipal court, where Murray and his attorney presented their arguments with precision. They meticulously deconstructed the language of the HOA's notices and exposed glaring inconsistencies with the official community bylaws. Expert testimony was introduced, and witnesses, including several neighbors, testified about their observations on the day of the incident and the subsequent retaliatory actions by the HOA. The courtroom was charged with tension as evidence unfolded, revealing that the HOA's claims were not only unfounded but amounted to an abuse of power. After days of rigorous hearings, the judge delivered a ruling that was both decisive and symbolic. The court dismissed the HOA's claims against Layla, affirming that her actions were justified given the extraordinary circumstances. Moreover, the decision sent a strong message about the limits of HOAs in arbitrarily penalizing residents for lawful behavior. The ruling was celebrated not only by the Muhammad family but by many residents of Sunnyside Acres who had silently endured similar injustices. The legal victory was a turning point, marking a significant defeat for an HOA that prided itself on rigid control. Karen and her cohorts were forced to retract their notices, and plans were put in motion to overhaul the HOA's enforcement practices. For Murray, the courtroom battle was a vindication of his years of quiet persistence and meticulous documentation. It proved that the community's rights could not be trampled by an overreaching bureaucracy. As the legal dust began to settle, residents felt a renewed sense of empowerment. The ruling reinforced the importance of standing up for one's rights and paved the way for more transparent, fair policies in Sunnyside Acres. While the legal showdown had provided a resounding victory against arbitrary enforcement, Murray Muhammad and Layla soon discovered that the turmoil in Sunnyside Acres was far from over. Curious about the broader implications of the HOA's mismanagement, Layla, determined and resourceful, began to scrutinize the financial operations of the organization. Over time, her investigation uncovered a trail of alarming irregularities that pointed to serious financial mismanagement within the HOA. Layla started by requesting access to the HOA's budget reports and meeting minutes, documents that were supposed to offer transparency about how funds were allocated and spent. What she found shocked her: the numbers did not add up. Expensive community projects were funded with surprisingly meager budgets, while fines levied on residents seemed disproportionate to the actual costs of enforcement. Discrepancies between reported income and actual spending raised red flags, prompting Layla to delve deeper. Using her analytical skills honed during years of service, Layla carefully cross-referenced the financial statements with the documented actions of the HOA. She discovered that large sums of money were diverted from community improvement funds to cover unexplained expenses, and that several contractors who had been awarded projects by the HOA were linked to board members by personal connections. The lack of independent audits and the secretive nature of financial decisions painted a picture of systemic negligence and potential corruption. Determined to validate her findings, Layla reached out to a trusted local accountant with experience in nonprofit governance. Together, they uncovered evidence that pointed to unauthorized expenditures and a series of irregular financial transactions that had gone unchallenged for years. Moreover, anonymous tips from disgruntled former employees of the HOA confirmed that significant sums had been misappropriated, with funds being funneled into personal accounts under the guise of community expenses. The revelation was damning. the very organization that was supposed to protect the neighborhood's interests was, in reality, a conduit for financial abuse. Faced with these findings, Layla decided that the next logical step was to alert federal authorities. Despite feeling a pang of guilt at the thought of involving outside agencies in what she had hoped was a local matter, she recognized that only a thorough, impartial audit could bring accountability to the HOA's mismanagement. Layla compiled all her documentation and handed it over to the Environmental Protection Agency's Financial Oversight Unit, which had the jurisdiction to investigate such matters. Within a short time, the federal audit was launched. Investigators combed through transaction records, scrutinized contracts, and held interviews with current board members and contractors. The audit confirmed Layla's worst suspicions. There was a clear pattern of financial irregularities, misappropriated funds, and conflicts of interest that violated several regulatory provisions. The resulting report not only validated her investigation but also led to significant fines being levied against the HOA. The fallout from the audit quickly spread through Sunnyside Acres. Many residents, previously unaware of the scope of the corruption, were outraged by the misuse of communal funds and the betrayal of their trust. Layla's efforts became a rallying point for demands that the HOA's financial operations be completely overhauled. For Murray and Layla, this discovery was bittersweet. While it was gratifying to finally expose the mismanagement, it also underscored the depth of the problems they faced in their community. The federal audit not only forced a reckoning for the HOA but also set in motion a broader campaign for transparency and accountability. With the financial scandal laid bare, residents began to mobilize around the idea of reclaiming control over community finances. It was clear that the corruption within the HOA extended far beyond individual incidents of petty enforcement. It was a fundamental flaw in the governance of Sunnyside Acres that required urgent, comprehensive reform. Empowered by the revelations of financial mismanagement and spurred by the recent legal victories, Murray Muhammad and Layla set out to rally their neighbors in a bid to reclaim their community. With the weight of institutional abuse now clearly evident, they knew that grassroots action was the key to ensuring lasting change in Sunnyside Acres. Layla began by designing simple yet bold flyers that laid out the abuses uncovered within the HOA. Detailing unauthorized fines, the misappropriation of funds, and the excessive enforcement tactics. These flyers, printed in large, easy-to-read fonts and decorated with clear graphs and bullet points, were distributed door-to-door by residents who had long grown tired of the status quo. The message was unequivocal: the current system was broken, and it was time for the neighborhood to take a stand. Word of the flyers spread quickly throughout the community. Soon, informal meetings sprouted up at local diners, community centers, and even in the driveways of sympathetic neighbors. In these gatherings, discussions blossomed about the need for reform. Long-simmering grievances were voiced, stories of excessive fines for trivial matters, invasive inspections, and a general lack of transparency in decision-making that had for too long plagued Sunnyside Acres. Murray and Layla, buoyed by the support of their fellow residents, organized a public rally aimed at drawing attention to the HOA's abuses. The rally was peaceful but powerful. Residents carried signs emblazoned with slogans such as "Respect Our Homes" and "Transparency Now," as they marched past the HOA clubhouse, a stark symbol of the bureaucratic overreach that had haunted their neighborhood. The grassroots movement quickly gained momentum. Social media groups dedicated to the plight of Sunnyside Acres provided a platform for residents to share evidence, exchange ideas, and coordinate collective action. The sense of unity was palpable. For the first time in years, the voice of the community was loud and clear, demanding accountability from those in power. The movement culminated in a town hall meeting that drew a record turnout. Neighbors, many of whom had once felt powerless, now stood shoulder to shoulder with renewed determination. With a firm resolve, they demanded that the HOA address every single grievance: financial mismanagement, arbitrary fines, and invasive monitoring. The community mobilization was not just about reactionary protests, it was about laying the groundwork for a reformed, fairer administration that would respect homeowners' rights. For Murray and Layla, the mass mobilization was both an emotional vindication and a catalyst for lasting change. Their personal battle had ignited a broader movement, and the resulting unity signaled a bright future for Sunnyside Acres, a community where every resident had the power to speak up, and where abuses of authority would no longer be tolerated. In the weeks following the surge of community mobilization, the tide reached its peak during a critical city council public hearing. This pivotal meeting was convened to address the mounting complaints against the HOA and its oppressive practices. At the center of the proceedings stood Layla Muhammad, whose courageous efforts to expose environmental violations, combined with the community's outcry, had led her to take the stage. Under the bright lights of the council chamber, Layla presented a well-organized portfolio of evidence. Her presentation included vivid photographs of the oil spill incident, detailed financial discrepancies uncovered within the HOA, and testimonies from multiple residents who had been victimized by arbitrary fines and intrusive inspections. Her clear and composed delivery made it evident that this was not a personal vendetta but a systemic issue affecting the entire community. As Layla spoke, the atmosphere in the room grew increasingly charged. Council members and local officials, initially inclined to dismiss the grievances as minor disputes, were forced to confront the overwhelming evidence that the HOA's actions had gone far beyond routine enforcement. Among the evidence, one particularly damning piece was a series of recorded phone conversations in which Karen, the staunch and once respected HOA president, defended the board's draconian measures while dismissing residents' concerns in a tone that bordered on condescension. The public hearing quickly became the forum where long-held frustrations were aired. Residents gave impassioned statements, describing how the unchecked power of the HOA had eroded the trust and comfort they once felt in their homes. Many recounted personal experiences of being harassed for minor infractions and the severe impact of the financial mismanagement scandal, which had already sparked a federal audit. The fallout was swift and significant. Under mounting pressure from the hearing, several city council members declared that the HOA had lost its mandate to govern Sunnyside Acres with such heavy-handed tactics. Calls grew louder for Karen and her enforcers to step down or be held accountable. The public hearing, with its powerful mix of grassroots sentiment and hard evidence, left no doubt that reform was not only inevitable, it was demanded by the community. By the close of the meeting, the council voted to initiate an independent review of the HOA's practices. Layla's testimony, along with the supportive evidence from the residents, had effectively dismantled the facade of authority that had once shielded the HOA's abusive actions. The fallout sent shockwaves through the community and marked a turning point in the struggle for fairness. In the days that followed, the local media picked up the story, further intensifying public scrutiny. The once private grievances of Sunnyside Acres became a public affair, galvanizing even more residents to demand transparency. For Murray, Layla, and their fellow homeowners, the public hearing was a resounding affirmation that their voices could no longer be ignored. In the final chapter of this turbulent saga, Sunnyside Acres emerged transformed. The combined force of legal victories, public hearings, and community mobilization had culminated in a sweeping reformation of local governance. With mounting pressure from residents and a clear mandate from the city council, the current HOA, long dominated by arbitrary rules and heavy-handed enforcement, was disbanded. A new board, elected by the people and committed to transparency and inclusivity, took the helm. For Murray Muhammad and Layla, the resolution was a moment of profound personal and communal triumph. The oppressive practices that had once defined their daily lives were replaced by policies that respected homeowners' rights and encouraged community engagement. With the new HOA structure in place, the neighborhood began its long-awaited healing process. As Sunnyside Acres settled into a newfound era of calm, life gradually returned to normal. The lawns, once scarred by relentless enforcement and unauthorized intrusions, were rejuvenated under the careful stewardship of residents who now felt empowered to govern themselves. Public spaces, community centers, and even the once feared HOA clubhouse took on new roles as hubs for unity and cooperation. At a celebratory community event held in the local park, residents gathered to mark the end of an era. Neighbors shared stories of past frustrations, while local leaders outlined plans for future initiatives aimed at strengthening the bonds among residents. In a heartening display of reconciliation, even Karen, the former figurehead of the oppressive regime, faded into the background as the community embraced a brighter, more democratic future. For Layla, this new beginning was bittersweet. Though her role as an active Delta Force operative would soon call her away again, she took solace in knowing that she had played a pivotal part in reshaping the community. Before her departure, she personally ensured that the new HOA board was equipped with fair-minded policies and that open communication channels were firmly established. In a symbolic gesture of unity, Layla even agreed to bring her signature bouquet of roses to the next community celebration, a nod to the fresh start that had been won through collective action. Murray and Layla, now secure in the knowledge that their home and community were safeguarded by real, accountable leadership, looked forward to a future filled with promise. Their struggles had borne fruit, and Sunnyside Acres was transformed into a neighborhood where respect, unity, and fairness reigned. In that hopeful moment, as the sun set over a rejuvenated community, the spirit of renewal was palpable. The resolution marked not just the end of a difficult chapter but also the beginning of a vibrant new era, one in which every resident had a voice, and where justice and community went hand in hand.